an inability to get out of it. Day after day after day. And the student that told me he was going to drop out of school in his junior year, I said, why? He said, because this place sucks. And I said, why? He goes, think about it, dude. You wake up in the morning, you come to the same building, you're here all day, you go home. You eat, you go to sleep. You wake up the next morning, you come to the same building. Oh, it's boring. I can't do it anymore. I said, well, what are you going to do after you drop out? Dude, I'm getting a job. I said, a job. I said, a job. Where you wake up every morning and you go to the same building and you work all day. And he got this really strange look on his face. He was like, oh, man. Well, at least I get paid. And I said, yeah, but not much if you don't have an education. Once you drop out, you're working minimum wage the rest of your life. So you're doing the same thing every... Oh, man. Which begs an obvious question. How do you live in a world, in a life, that's so repetitive that you measure it out by coffee spoons? He says, I know the voice is dying with a dying fall beneath the music from a farther room. It's like I've had the experiences in my past. It's like my past keep coming back to me. It's like voices from a hall, from a room down the hall, right? So how should I presume? In other words, how do I begin? How do I begin? How am I supposed to start? Look at the next set of lines. I've known the eyes already, known them all. Notice how we're breaking down body parts here. Known the eyes already, known them all. The eyes that fix you in a formulated phrase. This takes us back to that insidious question, the question of insidious intent, right, to lead you to an overwhelming question. He says, and when I am formulated, sprawling on a pen, when I am pinned and wriggling on the wall, when you were a kid in biology class or whatever, science class, if they made you go out and get a bug collection to put together, and you find your bugs, and then you stick a pen through the bug into the cardboard on the back. That's the word picture here. Let's put it in our notes. This is a compelling word picture. Prufrock says, I feel like I've been stuck through by a pen, and I'm stuck on a wall, and I'm wriggling to try and get off. Some people have said, if you work every day after day after day at the same boring job, it's kind of like being in a bug collection. In fact, one writer has pointed out that, you know, when you walk into one of those rooms where all those people are sitting in carrels where they're working and the little wall is there to define their 8x8 space, if you could have a dog's eye view or bird's eye view up above looking down, what would it look like? Well, it would look like a bug display, where in every one of the squares you have one little bug sitting, pinned, wriggling on a wall. And his observation is, then how should I begin to spit out all the butt ends of my days and ways? And how should I presume? Notice all the questions. In other words, what would it be like if you came to the end of your life and realize you've done nothing? You've done something. It's just that something was nothing. It was the same thing, day after day after day. Which begs a really interesting question. What's the point of it all? Look at what he says else he's known. He says, I've known the arms already, known them all. Arms that are braceleted and white and bare. Notice the parenthetics. But in the lamplight down with light brown hair. And then the question, is it perfume from a dress that makes me so digress? We're back to the women coming and going, talking about Michelangelo. In other words, there seems for Prufrock to be serious questions about whether he is able to attract women anymore or no. Arms that lie along a table. I'm always amazed at the fact that when Prufrock wrote this, he was very young. He was in his early 20s when he wrote this poem. But he's writing somehow capturing the nuances of an old man who is trying to figure out if he can still be at all attractive to a woman. He says, arms that lie along a table or wrap about a shawl. And should I then presume? And how should I begin? In other words, when you're already old, how do you begin again? Now, of course, let's just say at 3A really quickly for your notes, that when you are a senior, we're going to study a poem by Alfred Lord Tennyson called Ulysses, where Ulysses will ask the same question. Only there in that poem, he will say, I cannot rest from travels. I will drink life to the lees. This is the complete opposite of that idea. This idea says, dude, I don't know how I begin. I'm so old, and my life is so jacked up, that I'm not sure that I can tell you how I should ever start to fix what can't maybe be fixed. And then notice a break. And then a very interesting question. Shall I say, I've gone at dusk through narrow streets and watched the smoke that rises from the pipes of lonely men in shirt sleeves leaning out of windows? More ellipses. In other words, it's almost like a thought. There's a reason why many have said this is a stream of consciousness poem. It's almost like whatever thoughts are going through Prufrock's mind, it's like he just kind of throws them out there and he says, you know what I can say I know? I've walked the streets and I've seen lonely men looking out windows with pipes. That I can say I know. And then all of a sudden, the two lines that I told you caught my attention as a young lad studying. I should have been a pair of ragged claws scuttling across the floors of silent seas. Of course, you can see here that your footnote will even say that this is in response to Hamlet, the heroes, mocking the old Lord Chamberlain Polonius, saying, you yourself sure should be as old as I, if like a crab you could go backward. And that's in the second act, in the second scene of the second act of the play Hamlet. In other words, he says, you know what? I should have just been born a crab at the bottom of the ocean. My life would be no different. Now let's say three things here about this observation. One, notice, for your notes, we have moved from questions to a statement. Number two, but the statement is stated in such a way that it's kind of like a question. In other words, would it have been better if I was just born a crab? Number three, notice that we are working below the surface of the ocean. If you're talking stream of consciousness and you're playing the Freudian game, that is to say, Prufrock is ready to admit there's some wicked, weird stuff going on below the surface of the stream of consciousness, right? Of course, by the end of the poem, Prufrock will get awakened, right, at the very end of the poem. But then he'll also, what's the last word of the poem? What is the last word of the poem? Till human voices wake us, and we drown. Crabs don't drown, right? Humans drown. Crabs don't drown. Now, the question of whether Prufrock is playing the game of should I just take my own life is always going to come up at the very end of the poem. But notice here, he says it. My life would have been better if I'd been born a crab. Which is a really interesting question in 3b. Would your life have been better if you'd been born somebody else? Would your life have been better if you'd been born something else? And how do you play that game with yourself? How do you define your life as well lived at the moment that you come to the end of it? Because we've often said that at the moment of death, it seems all humans speak the same words. The words are, oh my God. The only question is the inflection in the voice. Because for most humans, they are like Prufrock. At the final moment, when they say, oh my God, they say it as, oh my God, what have I done with my life? Crap. Think about Scrooge at the end when he has shown, for example, his tombstone. He is aware that of all the money he's made and all the power that he has, it means nothing. Prufrock clearly has some money. He clearly has some power. He's able to identify himself as different from lonely men sitting in shirt sleeves, looking out windows because they have to smoke their pipe. But Prufrock recognizes it would probably have been just as well if I'd been born a crab, a nobody. Again, powerful poetic rendering of the feeling of alienation. Now we're back again to some dots. We finished with that little part, and at line 75, we'll come back now to the cycle of the days, the hours of the days, the afternoon, the evening, sleep so peacefully. Notice the exclamation point. Smoothed, more personification, by long fingers, asleep, tired, or it malingers, the afternoon, the evening. Stretched on the floor here beside you and me. And all of a sudden we're back to the let us go then, you and I. Who is the you and me that he says here? In other words, he says, I'm at the end of it. He recognizes his life as like a day. You're born in your morning. You then have a spring, right? You're born in the spring. You then have a summer. Then you have a fall. And finally, the winter, right? The October is the fall. He says earlier in the play, that's the time, or earlier in the poem. Now we're back to another question. Should I, after tea and cakes and ices, in other words, a bit of a party, maybe, a little bit of a meal, have the strength to force the moment to its crisis? In other words, do I have enough guts to make my move, if you're speaking in sexual language? Do I have enough guts to actually do something? Of course, this is really the same question we heard earlier. Do I dare disturb the universe? If somebody says to you, I dare you, what are they saying? I challenge you, right? Notice here he asks, do I have enough guts to actually make the move, to really try it? But then he says something interesting. But though I have wept and fasted, wept and prayed, though I have seen my head grown slightly bald, we're back to his vanity about the fact he's losing his hair, brought in upon a platter, I am no prophet, and here's no great matter. Now let's pause for a moment. This is an allusion that you got to kind of understand for it to make any sense. We have a story in the New Testament, in the Bible, about John the Baptist, who is this prophet preacher cat who gets himself in trouble with a king, and the king ultimately has his head chopped off and brought in on a platter. So Prufrock, let's put it in our notes this way, Prufrock will identify with two different characters from the Bible. The first is going to be here, John the Baptist. The second is going to be a cat named Lazarus, who is raised from the dead by Jesus Christ in the story of the Gospel of John, right? So here he says, I've seen this happen to me, and look what else he's seen. I have seen the Eternal Footman hold my coat and snicker. Look at the lines again. He says, I'm no prophet, and here's no great matter. I'm not like John the Baptist. I'm at line, by the way, 83, 84, 85. I have seen the moment of my greatness flicker, and I have seen the Eternal Footman hold my coat and snicker. The word picture is compelling. It's like he's been to the party, and he's leaving, and the footman who stands at the door grabs his coat and puts it on. Only the footman is death. Personified, death personified. And he's putting his arms inside of his coat because death is holding his coat up. And all of a sudden death does this. Snickers, laughs. Death laughs at him while he's putting his arms in. How does that make him feel? And in short, read it. And in short, I was afraid. Whoa. Prufrock says, I've seen the moment of my greatness flicker like a candle flame. Your life is like a candle flame, right? And then all of a sudden it kind of goes out. This, of course, will remind us of those lines from Shakespeare's Macbeth in the Tomorrow and Tomorrow, Tomorrow speech, right? Where life is like a brief candle, right, that goes out. I was afraid. Let's write this in our notes. Prufrock is a man afraid. But let's now ask this question. Afraid of what? Is he afraid of living? Or is he afraid of dying? Is he afraid of the life he's lived? Or is he afraid of the death that ultimately he knows he has to live through and finally come to? Of course, for those of us who know the play Hamlet, we're going to get there in a second, right? To be or not to be. That is the question. Oh yeah, here we are, right? All these questions. T.S. Eliot clearly playing the game of Hamlet and the Act 3 soliloquy, to be or not to be. Now we're back to, again, this question of, was it worth it? Was it worth it? It's an interesting question. At the moment of death, do you think that's probably one of the questions people ask? Especially if they're old and they kind of see death coming slowly onto them. And the question is, my life of what? Let's call it 70 years, shall we? 70, 80 years. My life of 75, 80 years. Was it worth it? Notice he says it. And would it have been worth it after all? After the cups, the marmalade, the tea, among the porcelain, among some talk of you and me. In other words, all the parties, all the inane, silly things of life. Would it have been worthwhile to have bitten off the matter with a smile, to have squeezed the universe into a ball, another reference to a famous poem by a poet named Marble to his coy mistress, squeeze the universe into a ball, to roll it towards some overwhelming question, we're back to overwhelming questions, to say, quote, I am Lazarus, come from the dead, come back to tell you all, I shall tell you all. The word picture here is in the book of John, in the Gospel of John in the Bible. Jesus Christ raises Lazarus from the dead after being dead for 3 days. What's interesting in the story, though, and many theologians have pointed this out, Lazarus is never mentioned again. Dude, he comes back from the dead. He's been dead for 3 days. Which obviously begs the question, dude, you were dead for 3 days. So you came back to life after being dead for 3 days. What's the obvious question that somebody might ask him? What's it like? And the idea here is, Prufrock says, I would imagine that when Lazarus came back from the dead, he had one or two things to say about what it was like, maybe even to make proclamations. He says, well, I guess I could maybe be like Lazarus and try and make some grand proclamation about what it is that I understand about the world. But all of a sudden, if one, maybe a woman, settling a pillow by her head should say, no, that's not what I meant at all. That's not it at all. Now let's go ahead and put it in our notes now. One of the important things that Eliot will say about modernity is that we have linguistic incapacity. We speak lots and lots of words, but these words don't seem to be able to have much meaning. Later, of course, he will say, it's impossible to say just what I mean. Right? We speak lots and lots of words. Of course, in Hollow Men, the other famous poem of T.S. Eliot that we'll study in your senior year, he will say that when we whisper, our voices are quiet and meaningless as wind and dry grass or rat's feet over broken glass in our dry cellar. In other words, we talk, we speak lots of words, but we don't say anything. Think about all the texting you do. All the texting that you do. All the texting that you've done this year. Hit the print key on all that texting. Everything you've sent, everything you've received. All the words. But our inability to actually articulate exactly what we want to say. Break my heart, Hamlet will say early in the play, the young man, for I must hold my tongue. I can't speak. And the woman in the poem says, yeah, no, that's not it at all. You don't understand me at all. You don't understand what I was saying, or vice versa. He comes back to the question, would it have been worth it after all? Would it have been worthwhile? After the sunsets and the dooryards and the sprinkled streets, after the novels, after the teacups, after the skirts that trail along the floor, and this and so much more. In other words, the silliness of my life. After all of that stuff, and then all of a sudden, another declaration. Notice the few declarations in this poem. I should have been a pair of ragged claws coming across the floors of silence. See, here it's impossible to say just what I mean. And notice the exclamation point. The frustration is mounting. The modern condition is a condition of both alienation and frustration. What's the source of the frustration? Well, let's write it down in our notes. What is the source of the frustration for Prufrock? What is it that he's so frustrated about? What is it that bothers him so much? Maybe it's the choices that he made. Maybe it's the choices he didn't make. Maybe it's that he's now an old man and he's asking still, do I dare disturb the universe? The next observation will sound very Freudian as well, but as if a magic lantern threw the nerves and patterns on a screen. This idea of the magic lantern is an early device, right, which projects images onto a screen. We, of course, today know this as movies. This is a fascinating question in word picture, and many have talked about this one as well. What if your life is really like a movie? Is there a script? The words you speak, the things that you think. Do you have the freedom to make it all up on your own? Or is your life actually not your own at all? It's like being in a movie where you're following a script, but you don't know that you're following a script. It's kind of like the rock that gets thrown through the air and he thinks to himself, I'm so glad today I chose to fly. Notice, would it have been worthwhile? One more time it gets asked. If one settling a pillow or throwing off a shawl and turning toward the window should say, that's not it at all. That's not what I meant at all. The idea here is the inability to communicate the most fundamentally important stuff. And the young junior girl who was standing with her guy that evening, and he looked at her and said, I love you. And she had studied this poem, and she looked back at him and she said, what does that mean? And he said, what do you mean, what does it mean? No, the words you just used, I love you. Can you tell me what that means? What does that mean to you? And he starts getting frustrated. He says, you know exactly what it means. She goes, no, I know what it means to me. What's it mean to you? Can you explain the very words you're using? Now he starts getting frustrated. What, are you trying to tell me you don't love me or what? She's like, no, you're not listening to me. You use the word. I want you to tell me what it means to you. Can you explain that to me? And now he's even more frustrated. It's impossible to say just what I mean. No, that's not what I meant. No, that's not what I meant. 3B observation. Can you jot it down in your notes? When was the last time you said something to somebody and you were absolutely sure they totally understood what you were saying, only to discover, dude, they got no idea what I was saying. No idea what I was saying. A fascinating moment, right? Then we have more dots. Do you see it? It's as if T.S. Eliot is trying to tell us that this is an ongoing conversation, maybe with himself, that Prufrock's trying to figure some stuff out. And guess what? We finally get to another declaration. No! Exclamation point. I'm not Prince Hamlet. Nor was meant to be. No. I am not a person born for greatness. I am not a person born for action. I am not a person willing to die. The readiness is all Hamlet will say in the play. I am not a person ready to die. No. Well, who does he identify with? This is a very interesting